Some moments only last a few seconds, but they're enough to bring an entire system to its knees. New York, 8:43 a.m. A 15-year-old boy steps into a courtroom. Pale, hollow-eyed, another troubled kid on trial for cybercrime, or so they thought. But in less than a minute, he would detonate a truth so big, it would ripple through the highest levels of power. And at the center of it all, Judge Evelyn Monroe, the woman known for her iron rulings, no-nonsense stare, and a track record that had never wavered. Until today, the courtroom was still when the boy rose from his seat and said, "I didn't hack the system to hurt anyone. I hacked it to find my mom. And she's sitting right there on the bench." Gasps. Pens dropped. Cameras clicked. What followed was a story of buried records, black market adoptions, and a mother who never knew her child survived. This isn't just a legal drama. This is a war between truth and reputation, a battle between silence and redemption, and a boy who dared to hack the system just to be seen. If you think you know how this ends, think again. Subscribe to Black Footprints now, because the stories we uncover don't just challenge the system. They expose the cracks it was built on. The courtroom was unusually still that morning. No whispers, no shuffling papers, just the sterile hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the heavy silence that settles before something unthinkable happens. It was a criminal trial. Routine, at least on paper. A 15-year-old boy named Noah Fields stood accused of breaching the National Child Welfare Database, an act federal prosecutors claimed was a deliberate and dangerous cybercrime. His face was pale, his eyes sharp but tired, far too worn for some of his age. Dressed in a navy hoodie, a size too big, and worn-out sneakers, he looked like any troubled teen caught up in something over his head. But he wasn't. At the front of the room, Judge Evelyn Monroe sat behind her polished mahogany bench, iron-spined, with silver streaks woven through her tight bun and a reputation for ruling by the book. Evelyn was the kind of judge who made headlines for how little emotion she showed in the face of chaos. Until today, the prosecution had just finished listing the charges when the defense attorney, half-heartedly, asked Noah why he did it. No one expected an answer, and certainly not that answer. Noah stood up slowly, ignoring his lawyer's gentle tug on his sleeve. He looked across the courtroom, not at the jury, not at the prosecution, but directly at Judge Monroe. His voice didn't crack. It didn't waver. It rang out with a clarity that cut through the legal jargon, through the marble walls, through the air itself. "I didn't hack the system to steal anything," he said. "I did it to find my mom." A few heads turned. A few pens stopped mid-scribble. But then came the words that detonated like a bomb. "She's here. Right now. It's her. Judge Monroe. You're my mother." A stunned silence exploded into gasps. The court clerk dropped her notepad. A reporter from the back row stood up so fast her chair clattered. The prosecutor muttered something into his mic that didn't reach the speakers. Evelyn Monroe's composure, legendary, impenetrable, shattered in one blink. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her gavel hand, so steady in delivering judgment, trembled slightly as she gripped the bench. Her eyes locked with Noah's. And for the first time in her entire career, Judge Evelyn Monroe was speechless. Security took a hesitant step forward, unsure whether the scene unfolding was a breach of protocol or a breaking point in human history. The media smelled blood and started scribbling furiously. In the hallway, someone was already live-streaming. But Noah didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't seek attention. He just stood there, eyes full of something far more dangerous than defiance, truth. Truth that couldn't be cross-examined or redacted. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He was here to be found. And now the question wasn't whether the law would sentence him. It was whether the woman behind the bench could face the sentence of her own past. Because if what he said was true, then this wasn't just a case about cybercrime. It was about a mother who never knew her child lived, and a child who just wanted to be seen, even if it meant bringing the entire courtroom to its knees. The moment she stepped out of the courtroom, Evelyn Monroe felt the walls close in. It wasn't the marble corridors of the New York Superior Court that suffocated her. It was memory. Memory she had sealed off for decades, buried under verdicts, briefings, and a life meticulously crafted to forget. But now it surged through her like a tide breaking against a dam she thought would never crack. She shut the door to her chambers behind her and leaned against it, eyes fixed on the antique clock on the wall. Tick, 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 like it had all these years, oblivious to the fact that time had just rewound. Noah's words weren't just a claim. They were a key to a room in her soul she had locked long ago with a lie she was told to believe. The baby didn't survive, Evelyn. It's over. She was 21 then, a rising star at Columbia Law, with eyes full of fire and ideals sharper than any cross-examination. But all that fire was doused the moment the pregnancy test turned positive. She remembered the trembling hands, the cracked whisper of, "Oh, God," in her college dorm, and the crushing weight of her father's voice on the phone that followed. "You will not throw your future away, and I will not let this family drown in scandal." Her father was Senator Charles Monroe, a name made of steel and ambition. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He decided. Within 24 hours, Evelyn was on a private flight to a discreet clinic in Vermont. They told her the baby was gone. She signed the papers. They never let her hold him, and she never asked again. Until today. Noah's face, so young, yet ancient in grief, had cracked something open. The eyes, the shape of his chin, the stubborn set of his jaw. Something haunted her in the most familiar way. Her mind fought it, clawed for logic, for disbelief. But deep down, some part of her, a mother's part, already knew. What if they lied? What if he lived? What if I sentenced my own son to a system I've spent my career pretending was just? The robe on her shoulders felt heavier than ever. The bench she once stood behind with unwavering certainty now loomed like a guillotine above her conscience. She had been a symbol of blind justice for nearly 20 years. Iron-willed, unshakable. But the gavel she held wasn't just wood anymore. It was a wedge, splitting her in two. On one side, the law, the oath, the system. On the other, the truth, the blood, the boy. How could she deliver justice when she was part of the injustice? How could she remain the voice of reason when her own silence had cost someone his childhood? She sat down, trembling, clutching the edge of her desk like a woman clinging to the remnants of her own integrity. Noah hadn't asked for money. He hadn't asked for love. He'd only asked to be known. And Evelyn, she wasn't sure she deserved to. Because now, for the first time in her career, the real trial wasn't happening in that courtroom. It was happening inside her. And the verdict? It would tear her life apart. It started with a name. Late at night, long after the courtroom had emptied and the city had folded into its usual sleepless hush, Judge Evelyn Monroe sat in her home office, staring at her laptop screen like it was a loaded weapon. On the monitor, the login page to the National Birth Records database blinked patiently. Official access required a subpoena. She didn't have one. But Evelyn wasn't operating as a judge tonight. She was operating as a mother. Or at least, a woman daring to believe she still could be one. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Then she typed it in, Noah Fields. Date of birth, October 3rd, 2009. Access denied. She took a shaky breath, cracked her knuckles, and clicked open an encrypted browser. A private back channel she'd once used for federal case research. Tonight, it had a different purpose. Within minutes, she found it. A redacted file. Name, age, location, matched. But the parental information? Blacked out. Not marked unknown. Just erased. Except one thing. Buried in the metadata, barely visible beneath layers of overwrite code, was a ghost tag. 4 letters and a single initial. Evelyn M. Her heart froze. Not pounded. Froze. The next day, she boarded a train to Vermont. She told no one. Not her clerk. Not her secretary. She canceled court citing a personal emergency and arrived at the windswept edge of a small town where nothing had changed in 2 decades, except the faces. At the retirement home just off Main Street, she found Nurse Helen Pierce, gray-haired now, slower, but still sharp behind the eyes. Helen was the only person at the clinic who had dared whisper the truth all those years ago, even if Evelyn hadn't had the strength to hear it. When Evelyn asked about the baby, Helen didn't hesitate. They told you didn't make it, she said, voice dry. But I remember you screaming. After labor, you kept saying, "Where is he?" I heard him cry. Evelyn sat frozen in her chair. Helen continued, "That boy was healthy, kicking and wailing. But your father had already made the arrangements. He handed you over to Dr. Langston. Remember him? Politician's favorite. He and a few others ran something darker." "What kind of arrangements?" Evelyn's voice cracked. Helen looked her in the eye. "Adoption. Illegal. Quiet. Rich families who wanted a child without the red tape. In return, the doctors got paid. And the politicians got favors." Evelyn couldn't breathe. Her name, her blood, was part of a system she had sworn to dismantle her whole career. She wasn't just a victim. She had been made into an accomplice. Unknowingly, silently, and tragically. Back in New York, Evelyn met with a former classmate from law school, now working in cybersecurity at the Department of Family Services. She told him she needed to see the raw server logs from 2009. It took him hours to crack through, but when he did, the truth screamed from the silence. There was a pattern, repeated across hundreds of entries. Newborns labeled deceased, reassigned anonymous identities, then rerouted to private adoption clinics with no documentation. Names scratched out, new lives manufactured, a system of erasure that left no fingerprints except for metadata. And Evelyn's initials were not the only ones showing up. So were names of senators, judges, even doctors currently sitting on national medical boards. It wasn't just a case of a lost child. It was an entire machine built to make children disappear. And now that Evelyn had uncovered it, she knew two things. 1, Noah had never stood a chance. 2, she would burn the entire system down before letting it steal another name. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Not even 24 hours after Evelyn accessed the sealed records, her office line lit up with a call marked private. On the other end, a calm, male voice greeted her by name, not with warmth, but with precision. "Judge Monroe, we believe you've been digging where you shouldn't." She didn't respond. "Consider this your only courtesy call. You're a respected member of the judiciary. Don't let curiosity undo your legacy." The line clicked. Dead. That afternoon, she found 2 plainclothes agents waiting outside her chambers, allegedly part of a routine security audit. They didn't ask about Noah. They didn't ask about the trial. Instead, they asked vague questions. "Have you noticed anything suspicious? Received any strange emails? Had recent unauthorized access to federal systems?" It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. An emergency conference call was scheduled by the State Judicial Oversight Board. Evelyn was summoned to a closed-door meeting. There, surrounded by stone-faced colleagues and tight-lipped assistants, she was told in no uncertain terms, "Drop the inquiry. Treat the boy as a cyber threat. Follow protocol. Or resign." She looked around the room. Some of these faces had mentored her. Others had toasted her appointment. But now, their eyes avoided hers like she carried contagion. This wasn't about law anymore. This was survival. At the same time, a fire began brewing in a place Evelyn didn't expect: the press. A young investigative reporter named Liam Rourke, working at a mid-sized digital outlet, had received a leaked tip from an anonymous source. Documents, scan copies, a list of infants marked deceased matched against private adoption records from the same week, 2008 to 2011. At least 30 matches. One name stood out: Fields Noah. Liam started asking questions. He reached out to Evelyn's clerk for comment. Reached out to Child Services. Reached out to one of the whistleblowers, Nurse Helen Pierce. And now, the story had a title: Sold for Silence. How America's hidden adoption pipeline was built on power and profit. Liam hadn't published yet, but the newsroom buzzed. Editors debated legal risks. Lawyers drafted preemptive statements. Evelyn received a confidential heads-up. The article would drop within 72 hours. With every hour, the walls closed in tighter. If she came forward, Evelyn would be vilified. Judge lied about dead baby. Mother and child cover-up scandal. Judicial abuse of power. The tabloids would devour her. Her career gone. Her courtroom revoked. Her name reduced to scandal clickbait. And yet, The alternative was worse. If she stayed silent, Noah would be sentenced as a felon. A brilliant, broken boy tossed into a system that had already robbed him once. And the machine, the one that had stolen her son and hundreds of others, would go on humming beneath the marble floors and courtroom ropes. Justice had always been Evelyn's religion. But now, she had to ask herself, was it justice she served? Or a system that only looked like it? Because if she didn't speak, who would? They sat across from each other in a private holding room. No cameras, no courtroom, just two metal chairs, a cold table, and the sound of the building's distant hum, like the echo of a world that had already judged them both. Evelyn hadn't worn her robe. For the first time in decades, she showed up not as a judge, but as a woman stripped of title, of armor. Just Evelyn. And across from her, Noah, arms crossed, eyes harder than she remembered. Not angry. Worse, disappointed. She tried to speak first, to explain, to apologize. But the words tangled in her throat like threads soaked in guilt. Noah beat her to it. Did you ever try to find me? The question landed like a punch to the ribs. She looked at him, really looked at him. His cheekbones were sharper now, carved by stress no teenager should carry. His eyes had her shape, but none of her softness. He was hers, and yet she felt like a stranger trespassing in her own bloodline. I thought they told me, she started, voice barely above a whisper. But Noah leaned forward, voice calm, cutting. They told you I died, and you believed them, just like that. His words weren't cruel. They were clinical, dissecting the silence that had swallowed them for 15 years. She looked down. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as if it could anchor her to something solid. I was 21. I didn't have a choice. You were a law student. You always had a choice. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. Noah leaned back, but his eyes never left hers. So tell me the truth, Judge Monroe. Are you here because you care? Or because your conscience is finally too loud to ignore? That question sliced through her harder than any accusation the press could throw. Was she here for him or for herself? In the quiet that followed, Evelyn thought of all the moments that could have been. First steps, lost teeth, scraped knees, science fairs. She had lived her life in polished courtrooms, surrounded by law books and logic, while her own son learned to survive in foster homes that never kept him. He had every right to hate her, but he didn't. What terrified her more was that he just didn't trust her, that he believed her motives were selfish, that he thought she was too late. I didn't know how to find you, she said finally. But now that I have, I don't know how to be what you need. Noah didn't respond. His silence said enough, because in that moment, Evelyn understood the true weight of what she'd lost. Not just a child, but his trust. And trust was the one verdict she couldn't appeal. It happened in less than 90 seconds. Noah had just stepped onto the courthouse steps, hoodie pulled tight over his head, trying to disappear into the chill of a New York afternoon. The trial was paused for deliberation. The media was circling like hawks, and he just needed air. A minute to breathe. A minute without eyes on him. He never got it. A black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb, too polished, too quiet. Before anyone could blink, for plainclothes agents swarmed. Tactical, coordinated, professional. Noah Fields, you're under arrest for cyber espionage against the federal system. Hand where we can see them. The cuffs clicked before the sentence ended. No Miranda rights. No lawyers. No chance. A crowd gathered. Someone started recording. A security guard shouted for backup. Reporters fumbled with cameras. But the agents moved fast, too fast. Noah's feet barely touched the sidewalk before he was dragged into the vehicle. The door slammed shut, and the SUV vanished into traffic like a ghost in a city of millions. In her chambers, Judge Evelyn Monroe watched the footage on her phone in stunned silence. Noah's face, the flash of fear, then the familiar mask of cold defiance, froze on screen. She knew that look. She'd seen it on defendants who'd already been condemned, long before the gavel dropped. This wasn't justice. This was retaliation, and it was her fault. The charge, cyber espionage, was absurd. Fabricated. She could see it from a mile away. But in the hands of the right people, the accusation didn't have to be true. It only had to be loud. She knew who was behind it. The same people who'd pressured her into silence, who had threatened her career, her legacy, her life. They weren't just trying to bury Noah. They were sending her a message. Stay quiet, or we bury you both. Evelyn stood at her office window, the city stretching out below her in a blur of motion and sound. She had a choice now, one that couldn't be reasoned with or postponed. She could stay silent, let the machine grind Noah into dust, keep her seat, keep her name clean, let the headlines fade. Or she could speak. She could throw herself into the fire, testify, expose everything. The records, the fake adoptions, the network of names and power and money that had stolen her son and dozens like him. She could burn down the house she'd helped build, but it wouldn't come easy. She would lose her position, her reputation, everything she'd spent a lifetime creating. But maybe, she'd get something else in return. A boy, a second chance, the truth. She turned from the window and reached for her phone, not her office line, but the old flip phone in the bottom drawer, the one without a digital trace, the one only one person had ever called. She dialed. Liam Rourke, the reporter answered. Her voice was steady, sharp. Get your recorder ready. I'm going to give you a story that'll blow this city apart. Because sometimes the only way to honor the law is to break it in the name of something greater. The press conference was held on the steps of the very courthouse where Evelyn Monroe had once reigned. But this time there was no robe, no gavel, no bench to separate her from the world. Only a podium, a dozen microphones, and a sea of reporters who sensed history in the making. She didn't speak right away. Flashes popped. Journalists shouted her name, tossed questions like grenades. She stood tall, elegant as ever, but different, softer, human. A woman no longer trying to preserve a legacy, but ready to reclaim her life. Then she began. My name is Evelyn Monroe. Until this morning, I serve as a superior court judge in the state of New York. Today, I resign from that role because I can no longer represent a system I now know is built, in part, on silence, fear, and institutional betrayal. The crowd stilled. A hush rippled across the plaza. Evelyn took a breath, voice steady. 15 years ago, I was told that my newborn son died during childbirth. That was a lie. That child, my child, is alive. His name is Noah Fields. The plaza exploded in sound. She laid it all bare. The fake death certificate. The black market adoptions hidden beneath bureaucratic fog. The initials buried in digital metadata. She named names, judges, doctors, public officials, backed by documents she'd handed to Liam Rourke, the reporter who'd refused to be intimidated. I was part of this system without even knowing it. I'm standing here not as a judge, but as a mother who failed her son and who refuses to fail him again. That line made the front page. The fallout was immediate. Dozens of sealed cases were reopened. A Senate Ethics Committee launched a federal inquiry. Public protests erupted outside child welfare offices across the country. Evelyn's name trended for days, not in disgrace, but as a symbol of redemption. And Noah, now released from federal custody, walked out of the juvenile detention center with a backpack on one shoulder and Evelyn waiting on the other side of the gate. He didn't run to her. He didn't speak. She didn't expect him to. Instead, she simply said, I'm here. He nodded. That was enough. They didn't move in together. Not yet. Noah went back to a quiet group home while the legal dust settled. Evelyn started volunteering at a nonprofit for displaced youth. They met once a week, coffee, sometimes lunch. No grand confessions. No force bonding. But slowly the ice melted. He showed her his sketchbook, page after page of a city imagined better than the one they lived in. She brought him stories from her childhood, her own sketches of dreams she once had. They laughed. They argued. They sat in silence when there were no words. Healing didn't come like a tidal wave. It came like spring, quiet, reluctant, but inevitable. One afternoon, as they walked past the courthouse together, Noah looked up at the building where everything had started. Do you miss it? He asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Not one bit. And for the first time, she reached out, not as Judge Monroe, but as his mother. Noah didn't flinch. He took her hand. The stage was modest, just a small platform draped in white linen under a city park pavilion. But the weight of what it symbolized was anything but small. A year had passed since the courtroom unraveling that had shaken New York to its core. A year since Evelyn Monroe gave up her robe and traded power for truth. A year since Noah Fields had been released, blinking into a world that finally called him by his real name. And now, the world was different because of them. The Children's Truth Act, signed into law just weeks earlier, mandated that all children adopted through public or private agencies would have the right to know their biological origins by age 16. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the past, but it broke the silence. It was a start. The lawn was filled with people, survivors, advocates, lawmakers, former foster youth, and media, and now less hungry for scandal and more eager for stories of transformation. Near the front row sat Evelyn, no longer center stage, but proud to remain just behind the curtain. She wore a simple navy blouse, her hair down, silver threads catching the afternoon sun. On her lap rested a leather notebook, filled with notes, sketches, and one folded letter from Noah she still hadn't brought herself to open. Because she didn't have to. The host introduced the final speaker. Noah walked onto the stage. He wasn't the boy from the courthouse anymore. The hard shell had softened, replaced by something more solid. Purpose. Dressed in a black shirt and dark jeans, his voice carried not with anger, but clarity. He paused at the mic, looked out over the crowd, then began. I used to think I was just a glitch, a mistake in the system. One of those kids who slipped through because no one was paying attention. He looked down, then up again, locking eyes with no one in particular and everyone at once. But I was wrong. I wasn't a glitch. I was the evidence of a lie too big to stay buried forever. A long breath, measured, composed. And as much as I hated the system, it's not what saved me. He glanced toward the front row. Evelyn sat motionless, but her eyes glistened. The truth did, even when it came late, even when it came at a cost. The truth, when it finally showed up, it made me real. There was no applause. Not yet. Just silence. Sacred. Heavy. Healing. Later, as the crowd dispersed and cameras clicked off, Noah stepped down from the stage. He didn't go straight to Evelyn. He made his rounds, shaking hands, hugging old caseworkers, greeting foster siblings who had once shared his bunk bed. Then, finally, he stood beside her. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn smiled gently. "I'm learning." They didn't need to say more. Because sometimes, healing isn't about big reunions or dramatic goodbyes. Sometimes it's two people, no longer broken, walking forward. Together. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "There's more," he said. "More names. More kids." Evelyn looked at it. "You sure you want to keep going?" He smiled, faint but sure. "Yeah, we tell the truth now, remember?" And with that, they walked off, not into a perfect ending, but into something better. A beginning.